Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This video uses AI narration to present our original book analysis.
Oh, cool.
Today, we're diving into James Bryce's The American Commonwealth, a classic exploration of the United States political system. You're in for a treat in less than 20 minutes.
All right.
We'll unveil the inner workings of the U.S. government, guided by Bryce's insightful analysis.
You know, Bryce wrote this book as like the ultimate guide to how our government works and what makes it tick. And it's fascinating how he contrasts the American system with the British parliamentary model.
Right.
He emphasizes how the U.S. charted its own course.
It's like he's saying, forget what you know about how governments usually work. This is something different.
Exactly. And that difference is rooted in two core principles: federalism and the separation of powers.
Okay.
These ideas are like the foundation of the whole American political structure.
Okay, let's unpack these foundational principles.
Sure.
Federalism, as I understand it, is that division of power between the national and state governments.
Right, and it's this constant balancing act. The Constitution outlines what powers belong to the federal government, what powers are reserved for the states, and of course, what powers they share. It creates a really intricate web of authority.
And then within the federal government itself, you have this other layer of division, the separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches.
Yes, and Bryce brilliantly analyzes how each branch has its own distinct role and responsibilities, and how this structure is meant to prevent any one person or group from accumulating too much power.
But even with a well-defined structure, there's always room for interpretation, right?
Right.
What really struck me was Bryce pointing out something quite surprising about the Constitution. It doesn't actually say anything about the federal government's power to force rebellious states to obey.
Or even mention the right of secession. This submission, you can imagine, has had huge historical consequences.
It really makes you think, how can such a fundamental issue be left unaddressed? Did the framers intentionally leave it open to interpretation? Or was it simply an oversight with monumental implications?
It's a testament to how much the meaning of the Constitution is shaped by events, interpretations, and even political maneuvering throughout history.
It makes you realize that the Constitution isn't just a document, it's an ongoing conversation.
Precisely. And now let's turn our attention to the key players within this system. Bryce devotes a lot of time to analyzing the President, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. He examines their roles, their powers, and how they interact.
These are the characters that bring the drama of American politics to life.
Bryce starts with the president and describes this unique position. You see, the president, while elected by the people, isn't actually a member of the legislature. This separation creates a dynamic tension, a system of checks and balances.
So even though the president is often seen as the most powerful person in the country, they're still constrained by this intricate system of checks and balances.
Exactly. And then there's the Electoral College, which Bryce argues has evolved in a way the framers probably didn't anticipate.
I find this particularly fascinating. It was intended to ensure the selection of wise and experienced leaders. But Bryce argues that it's become more of a reflection of popular will, a cogwheel in the machinery of democracy, sometimes leading to the election of individuals who might not be the most qualified.
Right, and that raises questions about the evolving nature of democracy itself. Is it purely about reflecting the will of the majority, or should there be mechanisms to ensure a certain level of expertise and qualification in leadership?
It's a debate that continues to this day, and it's something that Bryce was already grappling with over a century ago. Now, moving on to the Senate, Bryce describes it as this powerful body representing the interests of individual states. They have significant influence over things like appointments and treaties.
And he highlights this fascinating detail, the Senate's courtesy system. This meant senators were consulted about federal appointments within their states. It sounds very polite, but it actually led to a lot of patronage and political maneuvering behind the scenes.
So it wasn't as courteous as the name implies.
Not at all. It's a great example of how seemingly minor procedural details can have a huge impact on the dynamics of power.
Next, we have the House of Representatives, and Bryce dives into its structure, focusing on its reliance on committees and the pivotal role of the Speaker.
What's interesting here is how the House operates so differently from European parliaments. It's less about grand debates and more about the nitty-gritty of crafting legislation.
So it's less about eloquent speeches and more about working groups hammering out the details behind closed doors.
Exactly. And this heavy reliance on committee work can sometimes result in what Bryce called patchwork legislation laws cobbled together from various pieces,
Wow.
not always forming a cohesive whole.
It sounds like a giant puzzle being put together by different groups, each focused on their own little piece.
Right.
But how does this all affect the overall functioning of the government? That's what we'll explore in part 2 of our deep dive into the American Commonwealth.
So far, we've laid out the foundation of the U.S. government, as Bryce describes it, federalism, separation of powers.
Oh.
And those key players, the President, Senate, and House of Representatives.
Right.
Now let's look at how those players interact and how power dynamics play out in practice.
So like we've set the stage, now it's time to raise the curtain and watch the performance unfold.
Right.
What fascinated me was Bryce's analysis of the relationship between Congress and the president.
Mm-hmm.
He points out this lack of direct interaction built into the system,
Right.
which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You'd think they'd be constantly working together.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Right.
But that's not how the American system was designed. And Bryce highlights this fascinating detail.
Okay.
The president's main influence over Congress is through patronage, the power to appoint people to government positions. This creates a whole undercurrent of negotiation and maneuvering.
It sounds a bit like a chess game, where each side tries to outmaneuver the other to gain an advantage.
Exactly.
But there's another player in this game we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
The federal courts.
Absolutely. Bryce devotes a significant portion of his analysis to the role of the federal courts, seeing them as guardians of the Constitution,
Oh, wow.
ensuring its principles are upheld and that it remains supreme over state laws.
They're like the referees making sure everyone plays by the rules.
Exactly.
I like that.
And one of the most striking points Bryce makes is about the Supreme Court's power to declare state laws unconstitutional. This power has been a source of both stability and controversy throughout U.S. history.
It's fascinating how one institution can have such a profound impact on the direction of the nation.
It speaks to the delicate balance of power in the American system.
Yeah.
A system that Bryce saw as constantly evolving.
Right.
He didn't just analyze the government as it existed in his time,
Right.
but also considered how it might change in the future.
Wow.
And this is what makes his work so relevant even today.
That's incredible considering he was writing this in the late 19th century.
I know.
What kinds of challenges did he foresee?
Bryce understood that the Constitution is not a static document. It's a living, breathing framework that evolves through amendments, interpretations by the courts, and political practices.
Right.
He even observed a trend of power shifting from legislatures to the people themselves, reflecting a growing distrust of elected officials.
Almost like a pendulum swinging back and forth between representative government and more direct democracy.
Yeah.
It's amazing how he predicted these shifts.
Bryce also recognized the inherent weaknesses within the structure of American governance, particularly in a system like federalism.
We talked about its strengths, the division of power between the national and state governments.
Right.
But every system has its downsides.
Precisely. Bryce points out how federalism can lead to weakness in foreign affairs because the national government's power is limited in certain areas.
Okay.
He also saw the potential for conflict between states, which has been a recurring theme throughout American history.
And the issue of slavery and states' rights, ultimately leading to the Civil War, is a stark example of how federalism can create immense tensions and challenges.
It's a cautionary tale that underscores the complexities and potential pitfalls of a system designed to balance national unity with state autonomy.
Right.
What makes Bryce's analysis so insightful is that he doesn't present a simplistic view. He acknowledges both the strengths and the weaknesses, the triumphs and the struggles that have shaped the American experiment.
It's not a dry academic dissection of a political system.
You're right.
It's a nuanced and engaging portrait, full of insightful details that help us understand not just the mechanics of the government, but the deeper currents that drive it.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how those insights can help us understand the challenges and opportunities facing American governance in the 21st century and why Bryce's work remains so relevant for anyone who wants to understand how this complex system truly works.
We've spent the last two segments really getting into James Bryce's The American Commonwealth, its foundations, the players, and those fascinating power dynamics. It's incredible how much insight is packed into this book.
Yeah, it really is.
But now for the big question.
Right.
What does it all mean for us today?
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bryce wasn't just interested in describing the American system.
Right.
He wanted to understand its essence, its strengths and weaknesses, and what it all meant for the future of democracy.
And what's remarkable is how relevant his observations remain, even in the 21st century.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like he was peering into the future, seeing the challenges we grapple with today.
Absolutely. Think about the friction between branches of government that we discussed,
Right.
the influence of patronage, the rising power of public opinion. These are all themes that continue to shape American politics in profound ways.
It's like he gave us this roadmap, this framework for understanding not just the mechanics of the government, but the deeper currents that drive it.
Precisely take the example of federalism.
Okay.
Bryce saw both its potential for creating a strong, unified nation and its inherent capacity for conflict. We're seeing those tensions play out in today's debates over issues like immigration, healthcare, and environmental regulations.
So like each generation has to find its own balance between national unity and state autonomy.
And that balance is constantly shifting, shaped by new challenges and societal changes.
Right.
Bryce also highlighted how the Constitution evolves through interpretation and practice, something we see happening today with the Supreme Court's rulings on issues like same-sex marriage, campaign finance, and gun control.
It's a reminder that the Constitution isn't some dusty artifact locked away in a museum.
Right.
It's a living document constantly being reinterpreted and reshaped.
And public opinion plays a huge role in that reshaping.
Yeah.
Bryce foresaw this trend toward greater direct involvement of the people in government.
Right.
But in today's world with social media and instant communication, that trend has been amplified in ways he could never have imagined.
It's fascinating and a bit daunting to think about how technology is changing the way we engage with politics, how our voices are amplified or sometimes maybe even distorted in this new landscape.
It raises all sorts of new questions about how we navigate this increasingly complex political reality.
Yeah.
Bryce's work doesn't provide all the answers, of course,
Right.
but it does equip us with valuable insights into the enduring themes and challenges of American governance.
So it's not just a historical analysis.
Right.
It's a guide for understanding the present and navigating the future of American democracy.
Exactly. The American Commonwealth remains a must-read for anyone who wants to truly grapple with the complexities of this grand experiment.
Okay.
Its enduring strengths, its inherent flaws, and its constant potential for both progress and peril.
Ready to delve deeper into the complexities of American governance? Subscribe to our channel and purchase the book via the link below.